I married a man old enough to remember a world that never made room for girls like me, and on the night I became his wife, he gave me one rule that felt less like a command and more like a warning. The dress was too heavy, layers of ivory fabric pressing against my ribs like it was trying to remind me to breathe, but I couldn't, not really, not with a room full of strangers watching me like I was part of a transaction already completed. The chandelier above us glowed warm and golden, reflecting off polished marble floors that had probably never known what it felt like to be broken, and I stood there thinking about how everything in this place looked permanent except me. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 23 years old, and exactly 12 hours ago I still believed I had a choice. My father called it an arrangement, his voice shaking as he avoided my eyes, like if he didn't look at me, it wouldn't feel like he was handing me over, and I told myself I understood, that debts didn't disappear just because you wished hard enough, but understanding something doesn't make it hurt any less. When Victor Hale walked into the room earlier that evening, everything shifted without a single word being spoken, conversations softened, people stepped aside, and I felt it before I even saw him, that quiet kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself because it knows the world already bends around it. 65 years old, tailored black suit, silver at his temples that only made him look more deliberate, more controlled, like time hadn't weakened him but sharpened him into something precise and unbreakable. He didn't smile when he looked at me, didn't soften, didn't pretend this was anything other than what it was, and somehow that honesty was more unsettling than any lie could have been. The ceremony itself passed in a blur, a voice speaking words I barely heard, my hands colder than the air in the room as his fingers closed around mine, steady and firm but not tight, never tight, like even in that moment he was measuring something I couldn't see. I expected something else from him, something harsher, something that would confirm every fear I'd built in my head on the drive here, but instead there was restraint, and that confused me more than anything. When it was over, when the last guest disappeared and the doors closed behind them, the silence felt louder than the vows had been, stretching between us like a distance neither of us had crossed yet. He turned to me then, finally speaking, his voice low, controlled, carrying a weight that made it impossible to ignore. "You can hate me if you want," he said, like it didn't matter, like he had already accounted for it, "but there is one rule you will follow." My heart stuttered, my mind racing through 1,000 possibilities, each one worse than the last, each one confirming the version of him I had prepared myself to survive. He didn't step closer, didn't reach for me, didn't try to claim anything beyond the words already spoken. "You will never enter my room," he continued, his gaze steady on mine, not cold but not warm either, something else entirely, something guarded. "Not under any circumstances." I blinked, the words not matching the expectations I had built so carefully, the fear shifting into something unfamiliar, something sharper because I didn't understand it. "Why?" I asked before I could stop myself, my voice quieter than I intended, like the walls might be listening. For a moment, just a second, something flickered in his eyes, gone so quickly I almost thought I imagined it, something that looked dangerously close to pain. "Because," he said, turning away from me as if the answer cost him more than he was willing to show, "some things are safer left untouched." And just like that, I realized I hadn't been brought here to be owned. I had been brought here to be kept. The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed longer than it should have, like the house itself was listening to the rule he had just given me and deciding whether I would break it, and I stood there in the center of a room that was now mine, except it did not feel like mine at all, the silence pressing in from every corner as if it had been waiting for me. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing a view of the city lights miles away, tiny and distant, like everything I used to know had been reduced to something I could not reach anymore. I moved slowly, my heels sinking into the thick carpet, each step too loud in a place that demanded quiet, and I realized I did not even know where to put my hands, what to do with myself now that the moment had passed and there was nothing left to perform. Married. The word did not settle. It hovered somewhere outside of me, unreal, like a story I had heard about someone else. I reached up and touched the edge of the necklace they had given me earlier, something expensive and cold against my skin, and for a second I missed the cheap silver chain I used to wear, the one that meant nothing to anyone but me. A knock came at the door, gentle, controlled, and when I opened it, a woman stood there in a crisp uniform, her posture straight, her expression neutral in a way that felt practiced. She introduced herself as Mrs. Green, told me she would be attending to anything I needed, her voice calm, steady, like nothing about this situation was unusual. I wanted to ask her if she had seen this before, if girls like me showed up here often, traded for something that could not be undone, but the question stayed locked behind my teeth. Instead, I nodded, pretending I understood the rules of a world I had just been dropped into without warning. She guided me through the suite, pointing out rooms I would use, spaces that were now assigned to me, every detail arranged with a kind of precision that made it clear this life had been prepared in advance. Nothing here was accidental. Nothing here was temporary. When she left, the silence returned, heavier this time, filled with questions I could not stop asking myself. Why that rule? Why that door? Why me? I walked to the far end of the hallway, my steps slowing as I noticed it, the door he had meant, darker than the others, set slightly apart, like even the architecture respected the boundary he had drawn. My heart began to beat faster without permission, the memory of his voice replaying in my head, calm but firm, not a suggestion, not a threat, something else entirely. You will never enter my room. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it. Like it might answer me if I looked hard enough, like I could understand something about him just by being close to the one place he had told me to avoid. It did not feel dangerous. That was the problem. It felt quiet. Closed. Final. I reached out before I could stop myself, my fingers hovering just inches from the handle, the cool metal catching the light, and for a second I imagined what would happen if I ignored him, if I pushed it open and proved that whatever control he thought he had did not extend that far. My hand trembled, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, something that told me this was not a line drawn for power, but for something else I did not understand yet. I pulled back slowly, my breath uneven, the realization settling in like a weight I could not shake. This was not about keeping me out. It was about keeping something in. And for the first time since this began, I wondered if the rule was not meant to control me at all, but to protect me from a truth I was not ready to see. Morning did not arrive gently in that house, it appeared all at once, sunlight cutting through the tall windows like it had somewhere important to be, and I woke up in a bed that was too large, too perfect, with sheets that felt untouched by anything real, as if even sleep here had rules I had not learned yet. For a moment I forgot where I was, my mind reaching for something familiar, the sound of traffic outside my old apartment, the hum of a cheap refrigerator, the kind of noise that made silence feel less heavy, but there was nothing here except quiet, controlled and deliberate, like the rest of this place. I sat up slowly, the events of the night before settling back into me piece by piece, the dress, the ceremony, his voice, that one rule that refused to leave my thoughts no matter how hard I tried to push it aside. You will never enter my room. I repeated it silently, testing it, turning it over like it might reveal something different in the morning light, but it felt the same, solid and unyielding, like a boundary that had been there long before I arrived. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts, and Mrs. Green entered with a tray, her movements precise, efficient, like she had done this 100 times before, placing coffee and breakfast near the window where the light fell just right. She asked if I had slept well, her tone polite but distant, and I realized she was not asking for the truth, only the answer that fit the structure of this place. I nodded anyway, even though sleep had come in fragments, broken by the image of that door at the end of the hallway, by the feeling that something inside it was waiting without making a sound. As I dressed, choosing from clothes that were not mine but somehow fit perfectly, I noticed how everything here anticipated my needs before I could even name them, as if someone had studied me, prepared for me, arranged this life with careful intention, and the thought made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. When I stepped into the hallway, the house felt different in daylight, less like a shadow and more like something alive, every detail sharp and intentional, every surface reflecting a version of control I was not used to. I moved slowly, my eyes drawn again to that door, the one place that did not change under the light, still closed, still quiet, still separate from everything else. I told myself I would not look, that I would walk past it like it meant nothing, but my steps slowed anyway, my attention pulled toward it like a question I could not stop asking. Why would a man like him draw a line there, of all places? Why would that be the only thing he demanded? I was still standing there when I heard footsteps behind me, steady, unhurried, and I turned before I could think, my breath catching as Victor Hale came into view, already dressed, already composed, like he had never slept at all. He did not look surprised to find me here, did not question why I stood so close to the one place I had been told to avoid, his gaze moving briefly to the door before returning to me, sharp but unreadable. For a second, neither of us spoke, the space between us filled with something I could not name, something that felt less like tension and more like recognition of a line we both understood. "You are curious," he said finally, his voice calm, not accusing, not amused, simply stating a fact that did not need to be argued. I opened my mouth to respond, to deny it, to say something that would put distance between me and the truth, but the words did not come. Because he was right. And somehow, that felt more dangerous than anything else so far. He studied me for a moment longer, then glanced at the door again, his expression shifting in a way that was almost imperceptible, something tightening just beneath the surface. "Curiosity is not always your enemy," he continued, quieter now, like the house itself should not hear what came next, "but there are doors that do not open without consequences." My pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from the way he said it, like he was not warning me away, but preparing me for something I had not yet seen. And in that moment, I understood something that unsettled me more than the rule itself. He was not afraid I would break it. He was afraid of what would happen if I did. His words did not leave when he walked away, they stayed in the air like something unfinished, settling into my thoughts in a way that made it impossible to pretend I had not heard them, and I stood there a second too long after he passed me, listening to the quiet rhythm of his footsteps fade down the hallway until the house returned to that controlled silence that now felt less empty and more watchful. I told myself to move, to step away from the door, to prove to both of us that I understood the boundary, but my feet did not listen right away, my attention still fixed on the handle as if it might shift on its own, as if something behind it might be aware of me standing here, hesitating. "Doors do not open without consequences." The sentence repeated in my mind, not like a warning meant to scare me, but like a truth he had already accepted long before I arrived. I finally turned away, forcing myself to walk down the hall, each step heavier than it should have been, like I was leaving something unfinished behind me, something that would not stay quiet forever. The rest of the day unfolded with a kind of strange normalcy that felt almost more unsettling than anything else, meals appearing exactly when I needed them, staff moving through the house with quiet efficiency, never intrusive, never lingering, everything designed to keep the world running smoothly without asking for anything in return. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt studied. Like every need I had was already known before I could even form it, like I was part of a system that had been carefully built to anticipate me. By late afternoon, I found myself in the garden, a place that felt almost out of place compared to the rest of the house, softer somehow, less controlled, with flowers that grew in imperfect patterns and a breeze that did not ask permission before it moved through the space. I sat on a stone bench, letting the sunlight warm my skin, trying to convince myself that this could become something livable, something I could adjust to if I just stopped asking questions I was not meant to answer. But the problem was not the house. It was him. Victor Hale did not act like the man I had prepared myself for. He did not demand, did not hover, did not remind me of what this arrangement was supposed to mean. Instead, he gave me distance. Space. And that made everything more complicated, because it left room for doubt, for curiosity, for questions that had nowhere to go. I heard him before I saw him again, his presence marked not by noise but by the subtle shift in the air, the way the space around me seemed to become more defined, more focused, and when I looked up, he was standing a few feet away, watching me with that same unreadable expression that made it impossible to tell what he was thinking. "You should get used to the garden," he said, his voice calm, like he was discussing something simple, something ordinary. "It is the only place in this house that does not belong to me." I frowned slightly, the words catching me off guard, because nothing about this place felt like it existed outside of his control, not the walls, not the staff, not even the silence. "Then who does it belong to?" I asked before I could stop myself, my voice quieter than I intended, as if the question itself might cross another invisible line. For a moment, he did not answer, his gaze shifting past me, toward something I could not see, something that existed beyond this moment. "Someone who is no longer here," he said finally, his tone unchanged but carrying something deeper beneath it, something that made the air feel heavier without explaining why. I followed his gaze instinctively, my eyes scanning the garden, the pathways, the flowers, searching for something that would make his words make sense, but there was nothing there except sunlight and shadows and the quiet hum of a place that felt more like a memory than a home. When I looked back at him, something inside me had shifted, something small but undeniable, because for the first time since I had met him, I realized that whatever was behind that door upstairs was not the only thing he was keeping closed. And somehow, that made me want to open it even more. That night the house felt different again, not quieter, not louder, just heavier, like something unseen had shifted its weight and was waiting for me to notice, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Victor had said in the garden, the way his voice had not changed when he spoke about someone who was no longer here, as if he had practiced sounding unaffected until it became real. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer even though the room was not cold, my thoughts circling back to the same place they had all day, the same door, the same rule, the same unanswered question that refused to settle into something I could ignore. It would have been easier if he had been cruel, if he had demanded obedience in a way that made sense, but instead he gave me space, and space left room for curiosity to grow into something stronger, something harder to control. I sat up slowly, my heart already beating faster as if it knew what I was about to do before I admitted it to myself, the soft glow of the hallway light slipping under my door like an invitation I had not been given but could not refuse. I told myself I was just going to walk, just to clear my head, just to prove that I could exist in this place without feeling trapped by it, but the moment my feet touched the floor, I knew I was lying. The hallway stretched out in front of me, quiet and still, every step I took echoing just enough to remind me that I was alone, that no one was watching, that no one would stop me if I chose to ignore the one rule that had been placed between me and whatever truth waited behind that door. My breath slowed as I approached it, my senses sharpening in a way that made everything feel more real, more immediate, the faint scent of polished wood, the soft hum of distant air vents, the way the handle caught the dim light and reflected it back at me like a question. I stood there again, closer this time, close enough that I could see the smallest details, the slight wear near the edge of the handle, the almost invisible line where the door met the frame, perfectly aligned, perfectly closed. He was afraid of what would happen if I opened it. The thought settled into me with a clarity that made my chest tighten, because it did not feel like a guess anymore, it felt like something I understood without being told. My hand lifted slowly, my fingers brushing the cool metal before I could stop myself, the contact sending a small, sharp awareness through me, like crossing an invisible line that had been drawn not with force, but with intention. I hesitated, my mind racing through every possible consequence, every version of him that could be waiting on the other side, every reason why this door existed at all, but beneath all of it, there was something else, something quieter but stronger, the need to understand, to see the part of him he had chosen to hide more carefully than anything else in this house. I turned the handle just slightly, not enough to open it, just enough to feel the resistance, to confirm that it was real, that it could be opened if I chose to push further. And then I heard it, not loud, not sudden, just a faint sound from the other side, something soft and irregular, like the echo of something fragile existing in a space that was never meant to be shared. My breath caught instantly, my hand freezing in place as every instinct I had told me to stop, not because I was afraid of him, but because whatever was behind that door was not meant to be disturbed. Slowly, carefully, I released the handle, stepping back as the realization settled over me with a weight I could not ignore. This was not a room he kept locked away out of control. This was something he was protecting with everything he had. And for the first time since I arrived, I understood that breaking his rule would not just change things. It would break something I could never fix. I did not sleep after that, not really. I lay there with my eyes closed pretending that if I stayed still long enough my thoughts would settle into something quiet, something manageable, but they did not. They kept returning to that sound, soft and uneven, like a secret breathing behind a wall I was never meant to touch, and every time I tried to dismiss it, it came back sharper, more real, until ignoring it felt like a lie I could not keep telling myself. Morning came too soon, pale light slipping through the curtains, turning everything in my room into something almost gentle, almost normal, but I knew better now. I knew this house was built on things that were carefully hidden, not absent. I moved through the routine Mrs. Green had set without thinking: coffee, breakfast, the quiet rhythm of a place that functioned without interruption, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying the moment my fingers touched that door, the way my body had reacted before my thoughts could catch up, like some part of me had already understood what the rest of me was still trying to piece together. I saw Victor again later that morning in the dining room, seated at the long table with a newspaper folded neatly beside him, his posture relaxed but precise, like even stillness required intention for him, and for a moment I hesitated in the doorway, watching him before he noticed me, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the one who had drawn that invisible line upstairs. He looked up after a second, his gaze meeting mine without surprise, like he had been aware of me long before I stepped into the room. "You did not sleep," he said, not a question, just an observation delivered with the same calm certainty he applied to everything else. I moved closer, taking the seat across from him, my hands resting lightly on the table as I tried to steady the thoughts that refused to organize themselves into something safe. "Neither did you," I replied, the words leaving me before I could soften them, before I could decide if I was allowed to notice that about him. Something shifted in his expression, not irritation, not approval, just awareness, like he had marked the moment and chosen to remember it. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us in a way that felt less uncomfortable than it should have, like we were both waiting to see who would cross it first. "There are things in this house," he said finally, his voice lower now, more deliberate, "that exist because they have to, not because they are meant to be understood." My chest tightened slightly, because I knew he was not speaking in general terms, not really, and the memory of the night before rose up again before I could stop it. "And if someone tries to understand them anyway," I asked quietly, my eyes holding his without looking away this time, "what happens then?" He did not answer right away, his gaze studying me with a focus that made it impossible to pretend this was just another conversation, and for the first time, I saw something in him that was not control, not distance, something closer to hesitation. "Then they see something they cannot unsee," he said at last, each word measured, careful, like he had learned the cost of saying too much a long time ago. The air between us shifted again, heavier now, filled with something unspoken that neither of us seemed willing to name, and I realized then that whatever was behind that door was not just a secret. It was a line between who he was and who he had been. And somehow, without meaning to, I had already stepped too close to it. The rest of that day passed in a strange, suspended silence, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something neither of us was willing to say out loud, and I found myself watching Victor more closely than I meant to, studying the way he moved through each room with quiet authority, the way people stepped aside without being told, the way everything seemed to align around him without effort. He did not speak to me again after breakfast, not directly, but I felt his awareness linger, subtle and constant, like a presence that did not need proximity to be felt. It should have been suffocating. Instead, it felt intentional. Controlled. Like he was choosing distance, not enforcing it. By evening, the light had shifted again, soft gold fading into deep blue, and I returned to the garden without thinking, drawn to the only place that did not feel entirely shaped by his rules. The air was cooler now, the faint scent of flowers carried on a breeze that moved freely, untouched by the structure of the house, and for a moment I allowed myself to sit there without overthinking, without searching for meaning in every detail, just existing in a space that did not demand anything from me. But even there, the quiet did not last. "You are trying to understand me," his voice came from behind me, calm as ever, and I did not need to turn to know he was there. the shift in the air already telling me everything I needed to know. I exhaled slowly, keeping my gaze forward for a second longer before finally looking back at him, his figure outlined softly against the dimming light, his expression unreadable but not distant, not entirely. "You make that difficult not to do," I replied, my voice steady even as my thoughts moved faster than I could control, because it was true, because everything about him felt like a contradiction I could not ignore. He stepped closer, but not too close, always that same measured distance, like he had drawn invisible boundaries that even he refused to cross without reason. "Curiosity can become a burden," he said, his tone quieter now, less like a warning and more like something learned through experience, something personal. I studied him for a moment, the lines in his face more defined in the fading light, the silver at his temples catching what little remained of the day, and for the first time, I saw not just control, not just power, but something else beneath it, something worn, something that did not belong to the man everyone else seemed to see. "And silence cannot?" I asked softly, the question leaving me before I could reconsider it, because if curiosity was dangerous, then silence had to be something too. He did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting briefly toward the house behind us, toward the structure that held more than just walls and rooms, and when he looked back at me, something in his expression had changed, something almost imperceptible but undeniable. "Silence is what remains when there is nothing left to protect," he said finally, his voice low, steady, but carrying a weight that settled into the space between us like something final. My chest tightened at the words, because they did not feel theoretical, they felt lived, like he was not describing a concept, but a memory. And suddenly, the rule made more sense, not in detail, not completely, but enough to shift something inside me, enough to make me realize that whatever existed behind that door was not just something hidden. It was something he had chosen to keep alive by keeping it unseen. I looked away for a moment, my thoughts racing, connecting pieces that did not fully fit yet, but were beginning to form something clearer, something more complicated than I had expected when all of this began. When I looked back at him, the question was already there, waiting, unavoidable. "What are you protecting?" I asked quietly, not accusing, not demanding, just asking, because I needed to know if this was about power or something else entirely. He held my gaze for a long second, and for the first time since I met him, I saw hesitation, real and unguarded, flicker across his face before it disappeared just as quickly. "Not what," he said, his voice softer now, almost careful. "Who?" And just like that, everything shifted again, because the door was no longer just a mystery. It was a person. The word stayed with me long after he walked away, not what but who, echoing in my mind with a clarity that made everything else feel distant, like the house, the arrangement, even him had shifted into the background while that single truth moved to the center of everything. There was someone behind that door. Not a secret. Not a memory. Someone. I sat in the garden long after the light disappeared, the air growing cooler around me, trying to make sense of what that meant, trying to fit it into the version of him I had been building since the moment we met, but nothing aligned the way it should have. If he was protecting someone, then the rule was not about control. It was about separation. And that made it heavier, more real, because it meant the boundary existed for a reason that had nothing to do with me. That night, I did not try to sleep. I waited. I listened. The house had its own rhythm, subtle and steady, the faint movements of staff, the distant closing of doors, the quiet hum of a place that never fully rested, and beneath it all, I found myself focused on something else, something I had only noticed once but could not forget. That soft, irregular sound from the other side of the door. It came again, faint but unmistakable, threading through the silence like a fragile presence that refused to disappear, and my chest tightened as I realized it was not random, it was consistent, controlled in its own way, like something being sustained carefully, deliberately. I stood slowly, my body moving before my thoughts could stop it, my feet carrying me into the hallway with a quiet certainty that felt different this time, less impulsive, more resolved. The door was the same as always, closed, still, giving nothing away, but now I knew it was not empty. I knew someone was there. I stepped closer, my breath steady but shallow, every sense sharpened as I listened more carefully, the sound clearer now that I was paying attention, soft, mechanical, like something designed to keep a rhythm that could not be trusted on its own. My hand hovered near the handle again, not touching it this time, just close enough to feel the presence of it, the line that had been drawn so clearly between what I was allowed to know and what I was not. He said I would see something I could not unsee. The thought did not feel like a threat anymore. It felt like a truth I was already living with. I leaned closer, my forehead almost brushing the wood, my eyes closing for a second as I listened, really listened, and that was when I heard it, not just the steady sound, but something else layered beneath it, something softer, something human. A breath. My eyes opened instantly, my heart pounding now in a way I could not control, because that changed everything. This was not just someone being protected. This was someone being kept alive. The realization hit me with a weight that made it hard to breathe, because it meant the rule was not about distance for his sake. It was about survival for theirs. I stepped back slowly, my mind racing, trying to understand why he would bring me here, why he would place me so close to something so important and then expect me not to question it, not to reach for it, not to care. And then it shifted again, the answer forming quietly, almost reluctantly, but impossible to ignore once it was there. He did not expect me not to care. He expected me to choose not to act. I looked at the door one last time, my chest tightening with a feeling I could not name, something between fear and responsibility, because now I understood the weight of what I had almost done. This was not his secret alone. It was someone else's life. And for the first time since I arrived, I realized that breaking his rule would not just change him. It would change me too. I did not touch the door again that night, not because I was no longer curious, but because I finally understood what my curiosity could cost, and that realization settled into me in a way that felt heavier than fear, quieter but far more permanent. Morning came slowly this time, gray light filtering through the windows as if even the sun was uncertain about entering a place built on silence and restraint, and I sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment before standing, grounding myself in something simple, something steady, because everything else felt like it was shifting beneath me. There was someone behind that door. Someone who needed the rule to exist. Someone whose life was balanced on something as fragile as trust. When I stepped into the hallway, I did not look at it right away, forcing myself to walk past without slowing, without giving in to the pull that had felt almost magnetic just hours before, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt something different take its place. Not curiosity. Not confusion. Responsibility. The word came to me without hesitation, settling into my chest with a weight that felt both unfamiliar and undeniable, because knowing changed things, even if I had not seen everything yet. Knowing meant I was no longer just an outsider. I was part of the line that protected whatever was on the other side. I found Victor in the same place as the morning before, seated at the long table, composed, controlled, as if nothing had shifted, as if the truth he had given me had not altered the balance between us in any way. But it had. I could feel it before I even spoke, in the way my steps were steadier, in the way I did not hesitate when I took the seat across from him, in the way I met his gaze without looking away. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable as always, but there was something else beneath it now, something sharper, more attentive, like he was measuring a change he had expected but not fully predicted. "You understand now," he said quietly, not a question, not a guess, but something closer to certainty, and I realized then that he had known I would reach this point, that the rule had never been just about restriction, it had been about choice. I held his gaze, my fingers resting lightly against the table as I let the truth settle fully into place before answering. "You are not keeping me out," I said, my voice calm, steady in a way it had not been before. "You are keeping them safe." For a second, something shifted in his eyes, something small but real, like a door opening just a fraction before closing again, and it was enough to tell me I was right. He did not confirm it. He did not need to. The silence between us carried the weight of the answer more clearly than words ever could. I exhaled slowly, feeling the last pieces fall into place, the fear I had expected replaced by something else entirely, something quieter, something stronger. I will not open it, I added, not because he had asked, not because I was being told to obey, but because I understood what it meant now, what it protected, what it held together. His gaze did not leave mine, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something in it that did not belong to power or control or distance. It was relief. Subtle, restrained, but there. That was always your choice, he said softly, and there was no pressure in his voice, no expectation, just a statement that carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. I nodded once, the decision settling fully into me, because it was mine, because it mattered, because it changed everything about what this place was and what I was becoming inside it. And as I sat there across from him, in a house that no longer felt like a prison or a transaction but something far more complicated, I realized something that stayed with me long after that moment passed. He did not marry me to control me. He married me because he needed someone who would choose to stay.